look at me. I actually put on clothes and I also have coffee. A bitch is prepared. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I am in high spirits. I have no idea why. I'm just feeling good, feeling a little bit crazy, so I figured I would film today while I have so much energy. Maybe it has to do with drinking an entire giant thing of iced coffee. Who knows? It's actually warm outside today, which I'm sure is contributing to my stellar mood. Today I wanted to talk to you about a very specific subgenre of books that I have been really obsessed with for a while now. I've been able to find a lot of books that fit into this subgenre just in, regular kind of adult contemporary literature. So, the genre that I'm talking about is unreliable or unlikable main characters. Specifically either first-person narrations or third-person kind of over-the-shoulder narrations from a female's perspective. So I think it all started when I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. So this is what I would recommend for your beginning of this kind of genre. Because it's just where I started, and I think it's a great start. This particular book follows a main character. Her name is Esther, and she's going through college, and she has some serious mental illness issues. She ends up having kind of like a mental breakdown at one point, and it is pretty much argued that this is a autobiographical kind of retelling of Sylvia Plath's own life. But she did write it as fiction, so I'm going to call it fiction. And it's just beautifully written. It's fascinating. I highly recommend it. So this is where it all started. And from there, I have read so many books of unlikable / unreliable female main characters. So I figured I would take you through pretty much all of the ones that I've read and kind of give you the highlights, which ones I would recommend the most, and maybe some that I wouldn't super recommend. So let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to go through some 5-star reads that fit into this general category. One of them is, I think, probably the second book that I read in this kind of genre, and it's also I wouldn't call it a classic, but it's like a modern classic or an older book, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. So if you've been around this channel at all, you know that Shirley Jackson is my favorite author, and I'm obsessed with her, and this was actually the first book that I read of hers. And this cover is just absolutely magnificent. The deckled edges, too. Beautiful edition. We Have Always Lived in the Castle follows Mary Catherine and her sister, and it's from Mary Catherine's perspective. She's the younger sister, and they live together in this house with, I believe, their uncle? I'm not sure. It was a long time ago that I read this, but they live in this kind of abandoned old house, and the townspeople think they're crazy. Whenever Mary Catherine goes out, she thinks that they're following her or making fun of her, and you really can't tell if what she's saying is true or not. I think that's just going to be the general theme of unlikable / unreliable main characters, is you just don't know if you're just along for the ride or if what they're saying is actually true. But I think this was done in such a wonderful way. Shirley Jackson's writing is magnificent, and Mary Catherine is a very unsettling character. Eventually you realize something about her that you kind of thought about all along but weren't sure, because I think it's an instinct when you're reading a first-person narration to trust the narrator. You want to trust the narrator, but that's not always reality when the narrator is strange and you can't tell if they're really telling the truth or not. So this one I gave 5 stars, and I would highly, highly recommend it for this kind of trope. This next one was actually a professor of mine's, one of her books. I had her for a short story class, and it was so cool to work with somebody and then read some of their work and how their brain works. It was just such a fascinating thing. So that is The Other Mother by Carol Goodman, and this one I also gave 5 stars. I thought it was incredible. So it follows Daphne Maris is her name, and she's in this kind of new mothers support group with this other girl who's also a new mom, and the kind of weird friendship that ensues. Strange things start happening to Daphne and her baby, and it's very unsettling. But the kind of interesting and different thing about this one is that I didn't actually realize that it was an unreliable character until kind of towards the end. Throughout the whole time I was like, whoa, all these weird things are happening, and that's really overwhelming, and I felt bad for the character, and I wasn't really suspicious of her. I totally put my trust in her, and I think maybe that's, you know, what I think that's what Carol Goodman intended. But it was such an interesting experience getting to the point where the twist kind of happens and being like, whoa, I did not see that coming, and that is so strange, and I totally trusted her, and I shouldn't have. So I would highly recommend this one. I listened to it on audio, and I really did enjoy that experience as well. But yeah, I highly recommend this one, and it's great for unreliable narrators. Next, we have another 5-star read. This is Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. And I will say that Ottessa Moshfegh is pretty much the queen of unlikable / unreliable female main characters. I will also recommend this one. This one I gave 4 stars. This is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by her. But both of these are unreliable and very unlikable main characters. I would say especially for Eileen. Eileen follows a girl named Eileen who works in a prison, and kind of her thoughts and her situation leading up to her kind of just leaving town completely. It only takes place in like a week. I think it's like a week leading up to Christmas. So yeah, and I hated her the whole time. Ottessa Moshfegh is incredibly good at bringing out the really gross and weird parts of humanity that are somehow really relatable on a very deep level, because you can feel all these negative things you think about or you worry about, but she really plays those up and brings those to the forefront and is not afraid of giving us a character who seems really disgusting and strange. So I definitely would recommend Eileen for that. I don't know if I would categorize this as super unreliable. I think a little bit, because we're not really sure if Eileen has some kind of problems or if she is telling the story accurately, because it also is told from her perspective years and years later. So there is that kind of like, is this really what happened, or is she telling the story? But it's more of like an unlikable main character. And just because I mentioned it, this, as I said, is a 4-star, but this follows a young woman who is unnamed, which I also think is a pretty big trope of this whole genre, unnamed main characters. But she's unnamed, and she decides to get a shit ton of medication in order to hibernate, kind of just not be present for a year. So sleep most of the year, and when she's awake, she's not really cognizant of what's going on. So it is a very strange book. It feels like a fever dream. I think that was the intention, but still kind of unreliable, because you don't know how much of it's the drugs, the medications, or if she's telling you the truth. And definitely unlikable, because how can you like somebody who wants to drug themselves out of their mind for a year and not be a part of society? So yeah, those are really, really good ones. Moving on to a couple of books that I've talked on my channel about multiple times. And the first one is The Shame by McKenna Goodman. This one follows a mother kind of living in, where do they live? They live on a farm. I think it's Vermont. But she lives with her husband and her kids. And this one is about her dealing with the emotions of motherhood and feeling like she doesn't belong where she is, and frustrated by her life, and she eventually leaves, and it's kind of chronicling what happens up until she leaves and during her process of leaving and getting out and everything. There's also kind of another subplot to it where she is obsessed with this woman on, I think it's like Instagram, some social media platform. She's obsessed with this content creator and like lifestyle kind of person, and she really admires her and looks up to her, and she ends up going to find her. That's where she goes when she travels away. So it's kind of about obsession. It's about social media and who you see on social media and how you kind of idolize them. Because of her obsession, she kind of thinks that they're really friends, and when she meets the woman, she like totally thinks that the woman's gonna know who she is. And so in that way, it's unreliable, because you're kind of getting her perspective of, oh yeah, this is my friend, even though it's a social media person who she's never met in her life. And also unlikable, because she, you know, leaves her family and goes to find this random woman. So I gave this one 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely incredible, beautifully written, and great cover. Okay, my last 5-star read And I've talked about this book many times too. This is Hysteria by Jessica Gross. I would say that this one is kind of in the same league with Eileen in terms of like disgusting protagonists who you just really don't like, but very gross as, hey, look, a pun. So our main character in this one is obsessed with sex, and she tries to deal with her problems in her life through just sleeping with a bunch of men. And then when she's at a bar, she finds a man who she thinks is Sigmund Freud, which is just totally out there and strange. But she thinks she finds Freud and starts following him around and trying to talk to him, and it's just a very odd book. It is one of the strangest books I've ever read, but such a whirlwind. And if you're not afraid of kind of the more intense, darker parts of that, between the like psychological things that are going on and the discussion of sex and relationships and all of that, I would highly recommend this. I thought it was amazing, and it definitely is an unlikable main character. And, you know, obviously unreliable because she just walks into a place and thinks she sees Sigmund Freud, and you're kind of just along for the ride. So, absolutely love this one. The last physical book that I have to talk about is The Need by Helen Phillips, which I talked about recently in a wrap-up video. But this one is a 4-star book for me, and it follows Molly, who has 2 young children, and she thinks she sees this intruder in her home. And it's kind of about all the things that happen after she sees this intruder, and it's just totally crazy and strange and kind of surreal and just very odd and absolutely unreliable. Totally unreliable, because you know in the back of your mind the whole time that what she's seeing and experiencing makes no sense in the real world. So it is, you know, it's kind of impossible to suspend your disbelief enough to believe this story, but it definitely falls into that unreliable main character. But that is the last one that I would recommend. There's a few that I would not recommend so much, and this is just me personally. I've read Sisters by Daisy Johnson. I kind of got the vibe that that one was going to be similar to We Have Always Lived in the Castle, because that's how it was advertised. Because it's about these 2 sisters, and they live in this house, and then the one sister's kind of crazy, and, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on with that. And I don't remember if I gave that one 3 stars or 2 stars, but it just didn't work for me. It was very unreliable, but it just fell flat. I didn't love it. So I would recommend the ones that I've told you about a lot more than that one, even though that one is, you know, it's all over BookTube. So just personally, it wasn't my favorite. And then I was thinking of The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, which I know everybody has probably read, and that's definitely an unlikable / unreliable narrator. I'm not going to go into it because I'm sure everyone's, you know, heard of it, but I really didn't like it, so that's just me. And then I also read The New Me by Hallie Butler, which follows a young woman who has a job, and she is not really doing so well in it, and she's kind of just sitting around, not really doing much at home, and it just feels like her life is going nowhere. And that was, I had high hopes for it. I had really high hopes for it, thought it was going to be a lot better than it was, and it fell flat. I don't really have a reason why I didn't love it, but it just fell flat for me. So those books I would not entirely recommend for the unreliable narrator trope. So those are my recommendations, as well as some books that I wouldn't recommend for that trope. This trope is just something that I really seem to enjoy and read a lot of, and I really like hearing about the different perspectives of women, and the gross parts of their lives, and the beautiful things, and everything in between. And it's just a genre that I find really fascinating. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you got some good book recommendations from it. I hope that if you read any of these, you enjoy them. Let me know if you do in the comments below. And if you like this kind of video, feel free to subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.